Welcome to Social Aloe Ministries, where we are committed to glorifying God while exposing the devil. You may have noticed that I am very outspoken about certain things, specifically false prophets. And it's actually because of something I went through with a false prophets and the false prophets cohorts from September 2015 to February 2016. And some things continued after that, but that was the primary part. And that part of my life was by far the worst part of my life ever. The worst part of my life ever. And I will say that as a result of that, I am scarred for life. Scarred for life. But one of the beautiful things about scars, whether physical or those invisible scars, is that scars don't tell you where you are, but they certainly remind you of where you've been, what you've been through, and what the Lord has brought you from. And they also remind us of where we should not return or where we do not want to return. But everything worked out for God's glory. But the Lord has been revealing a lot of things to me. And today, September 30th, 2016. So about a year later. And the Lord is still revealing things to me. Because I had questions about why did I have to go through things like that? And there have been many benefits. And something the Lord revealed to me, and I think it was actually yesterday, was that I went through that because He knew I would not be silent. Many of you have been through traumatic events. And you're wondering why you went through it. And maybe what I said is a part of the answer for you, because the Lord knew that you would not be silent. There are times when I say things, and it's like I'm making enemies. But those who, in a sense, would try to throw stones at me, they can say a lot of things, but they cannot honestly say that I'm lying. And in a sense, I've made enemies because I tell the truth. And Galatians 4:16 states, "Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" As a result of the things that I went through, again, from September 2015 through February 2016, I am not afraid to stand up and tell the Lord's truth. A lot of people, especially those who claim that they're prophets, they like to quote Jeremiah 1:5. The things that I went through, it set me on a course that I can never return to the person I used to be. If I saw, for example, an abusive minister, a lot of times I'll just take it that maybe it's God's will, or I shouldn't speak out against a man or woman of God. Nowadays, I know better because I have seen the lens, or at least gotten a very good example of how far people will go and how they can abuse their position and or title. And in some cases, as Jesus tells us in Revelation, for example, some people have been tested who claim they are apostles, but they are not. And when they were tested, they were found to be liars. And that's what I found out in September, through September of last year, through February of this year, that people were liars. But I mentioned about being outspoken about certain things. And I don't care what a person's actual or perceived title or position is. If they are not telling God's truth, if they're claiming to be a messenger of God, but they're actually a messenger of Satan, I have an issue with that because of things that I've been through. And I'm not going to remain silent. Because like I said, people talk about Jeremiah 1:5, but I prefer Jeremiah 1:17. And especially based on the things that I went through, where the Lord doesn't have to say this directly to me, because all I need is a reminder of what I went through, and then these words come to life for me. Where the Lord said, "Therefore, gird up thy loins, and arise, and speak unto them all that I command thee. Be not dismayed. Be not dismayed. at their faces, lest I confound thee before them. So the Lord is telling Jeremiah to speak the things that he tells him to speak. And I'm the same way. I'm not going to back down from any person because of their perceived or actual title or position. I fear God more than anyone. I fear God more than anyone. I mentioned I used to wonder why I went through that. And for me, when I was going through things, and it got to a point where when the Lord told Abraham to take his only son, his son that he loves, and to take him to a place that he will show him and sacrifice him, that is how I felt. But I was kind of going through things, and I'm thinking, okay, Lord, I'm going to show you that I have faith in you. And like Abraham, you're going to tell me to stop. But the Lord allowed things to get to a certain point. In a sense, it was much longer than Abraham using a knife and about to do what the Lord said when the Lord told him to stop. For me, it went a little bit further. And I learned a lot from that. A lot. Joseph's brothers, they sold him into slavery. And later on, they met face to face when Joseph was in a position to crush them. But what Joseph said to them also applies to us. When the Lord allows us to fall into the hands of the enemy, and he redeems us. In Genesis 50, verse 20, Joseph said to his brothers, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." And in Romans 8:28, where we're told that all things work together for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose, the Lord uses all things for our good and for his glory. So when Joseph's brothers thought they were selling him into slavery, and that would be the end of his dreams, they actually put him in a position for him to fulfill his God-ordained destiny. And that's what happened to me. Because of the things that I went through, it actually propelled me towards my God-ordained destiny. A lot of times, there are forest fires. And I'll use the United States as an example, where you have pine trees. And pine trees have these pine cones that fall to the ground. When the fire from the heat heats the pine cones, it literally causes them to explode, and it propels their seeds. And that causes new growth. And there are times when the Lord will allow us to go through a fire to cause those seeds to come forth. In Daniel chapter 3, we see the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, where they refused to worship the golden idol. And as a result, they were cast into the fire. And in fact, if you look behind me, you can see above my right shoulder where it says, "Untrial the test of my faith." And it's actually a prophetic painting that demonstrates me kind of going through the same thing. Me going through the fire. But similar to Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, I went through hell, but the Lord was with me. I went through hell, and the Lord was with me. Because what I went through was meant to separate me from God. It was meant to take me to hell. It was meant to destroy me forever. And one thing about the devil, there are times where he'll think of you as being like a bird, and he'll pluck all your feathers, break all your wings, and he'll think that he has you pinned. No way you can escape. But the Lord makes a way for you to escape. And I'm like the bird where my feathers were plucked, my wings were broken, but the Lord made a way for me to escape. And despite the condition I was in, I was still able to take flight. But even when I'm speaking about myself, I'm also speaking about you. If you are in a position, there's no position that the devil can get you in that God can't get you out of. Whenever the Lord clears a way for you, drop everything and leave. Do not delay. And again, There are times when he will allow you to go through things. And the reasons that you think about, they may apply. But a part of it is because, similar to Joseph, where Joseph saved many lives as a result of his struggles, the Lord allows you to go through those struggles so you can save lives, so you can warn people. For example, when I used to read the Bible about false prophets and them being like ravening wolves, I didn't truly have an understanding of that. But based on what I went through from September 2015 to February 2016, I know how wicked they can be. And it's even worse when they pretend as if they're messengers of God, like the devil, angels of light, but end up being messengers of Satan. And when I was going through what I went through, I was like, okay, my Lord, because it actually got to a point where I thought, for me to be in this position, God must hate me. That is how bad it got, where I thought that God must hate me for me to be in this position. And especially if that's how he wanted me to spend the rest of my life. And if I was going to spend the rest of my life like that, I would not have been able to have a relationship with him. It would have been over. A lot of times when you're going through things, you start wondering if God is punishing you. In 2 Samuel 11, David committed adultery with Bathsheba. Did some things to cover it up, to include killing her husband. Then he married her to make it seem as if the child that she was pregnant with was a legitimate child. But in 2 Samuel 12, the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to rebuke David. And when he did, it set some things in motion. That child that Bathsheba was pregnant with, it was killed. In 2 Samuel 13, we see how David's son Amnon lusted after his half-sister Tamar. And as a result, he raped her. Even though she warned him about certain things where it could have been handled differently. But he was doing the devil's work. And as a result of that, David's son Absalom killed Amnon. But there were more. Because of what David did, it also caused Absalom to go into rebellion against David. He ended up taking the kingdom away from David for a while. David fled for his life. Absalom ended up paying with his life. So, as a result of David's transgression, his daughter was raped. 2 of his sons died. And when his son took his kingdom, he actually slept with David's concubines out in the public for anyone who could see, or anyone who was within basically eyeshot, they could see. All those things happened because David had sinned. So when I was going through things, in a sense, I started going through my Rolodex of sins, seeing if there was something that I had not repented of, seeing if I was being punished for something. All these things were going through my mind. Because when I mentioned it, it had gotten to the point where I thought that if this was God's will for my life, then he must truly hate me. Of course, I started thinking about unrepented sins, things I was being punished for, because it was truly horrible. But the Lord, he delivered me. Like I said, a part of the reason wasn't because I was being punished for sins, at least not necessarily. It was because I would not remain silent. Many of you are living with shame and guilt because of what someone else did to you, and you're silent because of it. And because of your silence, it is like a cancer that is eating you alive. And in some cases, you actually have physical manifestations because of the things that you're holding in. Some of you have been deceived, and as a result of that deception, you may feel stupid, and you're holding that in. And again, it's eating away at you. But I tell you, a part of the reason why I went through what I went through is so that I would not keep quiet. I'm not going to let things eat away at me. And I haven't begun to tell the full story yet because there's certain things that I'm waiting on. And I mentioned about Jeremiah 1:17, where the Lord tells Jeremiah to speak the things that he says and do not be afraid. So I also have to speak the things that the Lord either tells me or allows me to speak. And there are certain things it is not time for me to disclose yet. But when the time comes, I will have no problem saying so. Because when you hear the story, some of you may think that I was stupid, and you may have all kinds of things to say. But it all works out for God's glory. But a part of me going through that is that wheresoever I go throughout the rest of my life, whichever way the Lord calls me to serve him, is that one particular period of my life becomes like when the Apostle Paul mentioned that he asked the Lord to remove that thorn from his flesh because he had a messenger of Satan who was there to buffet him. But the Lord told him that his strength is made perfect in the apostle's weakness, and was also there to humble him. I got humbled. I got humbled. And if I ever start to puff up with pride, I mean, all it takes is a reminder of what I went through. And it takes me down a couple of notches. The Lord, he abases those who exalt themselves. But he exalts those who are humble. And there are times when he will allow us to fall into certain things so that we should be humble. King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel warned him to not get puffed up with pride. But the king did not listen. And as a result, he spent a season living like a beast. But when he emerged from that, he started exalting the Lord. He started praising the King of heaven. And I kind of came out of things the same way, praising the Lord even more. There's a part of me that absolutely hates everything I went through, but there's another part of me that appreciates what I went through because it is truly for God's glory. And if I had not gone through those things, I would not be the person that I am today. I am a much better person as a result of the hell that I went through. But that kind of hell, I don't ever want to go through it again. I have fear for the Lord, because I also got the chance to experience what it's like when he is with us and when he's against us. And I only got a feeling of what is against us because he allowed certain things to happen. He could have made things clear to me, tell me to stop, and not to say that there weren't warnings. But I got a sense of what it's like to operate in this life without God, and it is horrible. I know I cannot do anything on my own, but I know the strength about how his strength is made perfect in my weakness. And because of what I went through, I am forever a weak vessel for his service. One of the things the enemy did, the enemy awakened me. The Lord had called Samson to be a judge. And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Samson's mother, he told her basically things that were to come. A part of Samson being propelled into his calling was when he married a Philistine. And no, not Jezebel, or correction, not Delilah, kind of go hand in hand, not Delilah, but a Philistine. Her name is not mentioned, but it's in Judges 14. One of the things that propelled Samson towards his destiny was when the father of that woman ended up, after they got married, her father gave her to another man. Then the Philistines killed Samson's wife and her father. And as a result of that, the Philistines made themselves an enemy. And Samson, it changed Samson's life. And that's kind of life-altering event that I had. Something that unleashed something inside of me that will not be put back in this cage. That will not be put back in this cage. Like the enemy, he made a mistake. He made a mistake. he made a mistake when he came against me. But it also speaks how the Lord will use evil for good. Many people like to talk about Job and how the Lord blessed him. But before we start talking about Job 42, look at Job chapters 1 and 2, where the Lord allowed the devil to afflict Job. And as a result of that affliction, the Lord blessed Job. So the Lord used something evil for good. And the book of Job also tells us that Job was a righteous man, yet the Lord allowed the devil to afflict him. So there are times when you're going through things, and you may be righteous, at least to a certain point. You may be righteous, and you still get afflicted. And it doesn't mean that you're unrighteous while you're being afflicted. Trust the Lord to take you through the process. Like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they were in the fire because they were unjustly placed in a position while being faithful to the Lord. And the same thing to Daniel in the lion's den. He had been worshiping the Lord, and that's why he was put in the lion's den. And in both cases, the Lord was with those individuals, and he rescued them. The Hebrew boys, as they're called, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they came out of the fire without being burned. They didn't even smell like smoke. Daniel didn't have a scratch on him because they were doing the Lord's will. Sure, they had those internal scars. They knew what it was like to be in the fire. It was a reminder of where they had been, where they do not want to return. It was also a reminder of God's faithfulness, that when you're faithful to him, he will be faithful to you. Tell you, I still remember, and one of the things I truly realize is how much the devil hates those who love God. The things he will stoop to is unbelievable. Before September of last year, I truly didn't know that even the devil would stoop to such low levels and do so without shame. And those messengers of Satan will do the same thing. Again, pretending to be angels of light while being full of darkness. I want to mention about scars. In a sense, there are times when the Lord will allow us to get scarred. And it ties back to the humility thing that I mentioned with the Apostle Paul and the messenger of Satan. Jonah, he was disobedient. And as a result, he spent 3 days in the belly of the whale. A part of Jonah's scar, I can imagine whenever he walked by a fish market, whenever he maybe walked by the ocean, the sea, that he thought about his disobedience. And it served as a reminder to him that whenever the Lord tells him to do something, that is what he needs to do. Because he does not want to spend time again in a dark place like he was in the belly of the whale. Peter loved Jesus. He said that he would die with, or even for him. But Peter denied Christ. And when he did, the rooster crowed. And I can imagine that whenever Peter, when he was reinstated, that whenever he saw a chicken or heard a rooster crow, that it reminded him of the time that he denied Christ. And we see, for example, in Acts 5, where Peter considered it a pleasure to get punished for Christ. And a part of that, I'm led to believe, is because he knew that he denied Christ. And even seeing or hearing a chicken was a reminder of that. I deal with that too, where there are certain things that serve as reminders. And a part of the reminder is to let me know that the Lord has healed me. And other times, the reminders are to keep me humble. Because there are certain positions I do not want to be in again. And I actually hate when I see people in similar positions. Like Joseph said in Genesis 50:20, what they meant for harm, God is using for good. And the same applies to you. What people did to you in an effort to harm you, the Lord can heal you of those things and use it for good. And like I've been saying, part of the reason why I went through the things that I went through was because the Lord knew that I was going to come out and I would not be silent. Despite the multiple efforts to keep me silent, I would not be silent. But there's some more that I want to share with you. When I mentioned about the humility, in Hebrews chapter 12, starting in the 5th verse, it states, "And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despite not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom he loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then ye are bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh, which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily, for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure. But he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastising for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yielded the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." David, when he was chastised for the things that he did, you never heard about him committing adultery anymore. The Lord basically set him straight. The things that I went through, it has taught me so much, and I'm still learning. But it mentions about the Lord chastising us before accepting us as sons and daughters. So don't be surprised if or when your time comes, when you go through something, the Lord allows the devil to afflict you. And even scripture tells us about handing people over to the devil so that our flesh may be crucified so that our spirits can be saved. And there are times when the Lord allows us to fall into the enemy's camp because of that. And one of the things I've mentioned, I've even written about, was that the Lord allowed me to fall into the enemy's camp so that I would gain an intimate understanding regarding how the enemy works. So there are things that I say, and it's based on what I have actually experienced. And because of those experiences, it truly brings scriptures to life. When I read Luke 4 verses 1 through 13, and I see how the devil was trying to tempt Jesus using scriptures, that means a lot to me. When I read Genesis 29 and I see how Laban and Jacob had an agreement, but he twisted it at the end and caused Jacob to marry Leah, I understand that kind of deception. And for Leah to marry Jacob, she was a participant in the deception. A lot of times we talk about false prophets, but we don't speak about the people who support them, the people who allow them to perpetrate the things that they're doing against God. And some of the followers of false prophets, some of their supporters, claim to be God-loving Christians, but they're not. You cannot have fellowship with darkness while claiming to represent the light. You have to be separate. You have to be separate. And as a result of the things that I went through, I also realized why in Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 5, and also Deuteronomy 18, 20 through 22, where the Lord commanded people to stone false prophets. And in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 8 through 9, it states, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. And what that speaks to is that if the devil knew what was going to happen as a result of Christ being crucified, they would not have pushed for it. They would not have pushed for it. And as a result of those things, we can receive blessings through Jesus from God. And one of the things about Jesus giving up his life and becoming our only mediator between God, is that we should not base our relationship with the Lord through any person. When you look in Ephesians 4:11, it talks about the fivefold ministry: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Then there are others, for example, bishops. Do not base your relationship with God on a person. Allow Jesus to be the only person between you and God. Because what you may find is that you may end up with a person who has a title or claims to have a title, and that individual will mislead you. That individual will point you to another God. And I mentioned Deuteronomy 13:1 through 5 earlier. That's when the Lord said that if a prophet or dreamer of dreams tells you something and it comes to pass, but that person points you to another God, that individual should be put to death. That is what could happen. And the Apostle Paul mentioned about following him as he follows Christ. If you're following someone and that person isn't following Christ, it is time to follow someone else. But even if you're following someone, never allow that person to become your God. Because it is quite possible that you may start worshiping your pastor. Because there are people who are in a state of deception, and they may think it's obedience to God or obedience to a person of God. But if a pastor tells them something that is erroneous, and you present scripture to them, the written word of God, they will follow what their pastor says as opposed to what God says. That is a state of error. I didn't go into a lot of details, but the worst part of my life was from September 2015 through February 2016. But as a result of the things the Lord has delivered me from, I'm a changed person. I have scars that remind me of places that I've been, places I don't ever want to return to, and people are going to pay the price if they try to take me back there. It is that serious. But those scars also remind me of how good God has been to me. Of how good God has been to me. So with all the hell that I went through, I knew that the Lord was there with me. It could have been a whole lot worse, but he was there with me. And as a result, God has been too good to me for me to be silent. God has been too good for me to fear people instead of him. I hope this helps you, whichever you are with your journey with the Lord. God bless you.